Thank you so much for joining me, and I hoped you enjoyed reading my VBAC story so far. So I wanted to get into the rest of the story. So with my fourth baby, I had a condition called placenta accreta, or they thought that that was a possibility that I could have. And when I heard that, it was hard for me. Like I really wanted my vaginal delivery, and I knew that if I had another C-section, this would have been my third C-section, and there's not a lot of providers that actually are willing to VBAC a mom. So VBAC means vaginal birth after C-section. There's not a lot of doctors out there who are willing to do a delivery like that. So it was really hard for me to hear that. So when they gave me that news, I talked it over with my doula and I started doing a lot of research. At this time, I had just been trained as a doula, so I was still kind of in the learning stages of, you know, informed decision making and things like that. So, still learning. I wanted to do my research. I was looking, I found a site called ican.org. I started researching there. And then I also found a local VBAC group on Facebook, and I posted in there trying to find some advice. What could I do? Is there something that I can do to, have that vaginal delivery? Now, for those that you don't know, that do not know, a placenta accreta is when the placenta detaches into the uterine wall, and it's actually a little bit too deep. My ultrasound showed some placental lakes. Now, placental lakes can happen. Um, so it can be a sign that there's a possible accreta. Okay. It's not 100% because sometimes you get a placental lakes in your placenta and the ultrasound and everything be completely fine. So I really talked it over with them. I tried to understand like what are the risks of me doing a vaginal birth with this possibility. What's the benefits of having a C-section with this kind of possibility? So asking those questions. And there was not a lot of information on stuff like this, except that most women just go for the C-section. I'm just like, gosh, like I just felt in my gut and my soul. I'm like, this is no, I shouldn't do this. My intuition was literally like screaming at me almost like this, it just didn't feel right. So I had rescheduled my C-section several times. Induction was also on the table, but they were leaning more towards the C-section. Now, with the VBAC and induction, sometimes there is a risk of increased risk of uterine rupture with the C-section, with the induction using pitocin. So that was also one of those risks. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're like, you should have just done the C-section. But look, one thing I wanted to mention, my intuition was telling me, this doesn't feel right. Okay. So I accepted. I'm like, okay, fine, we can do the C-section. And I talked it over with my doula and tried to figure out how we could make it a birth that wasn't going to be like the last one, but still no peace about the C-section. So I posted in my VBAC group and I'm like, can anyone give me more information? Know anyone who I could talk to about this? And someone in the group actually posted the phone number of a very well-known VBAC doctor in our area. And it was pretty much almost a direct line to his nurse. So I called that number, I left a message, and this is 2 days before my C-section. So the next day, like I think it was like 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. And I had just moved into a homeless shelter actually at this time. And so just moved into this homeless shelter, and he calls me at 10 p.m. at night and he's like, yeah, what's up? Tell me your story. So I gave him my history of, my past placental history, because I had two previous, didn't have a previous this time. I had a successful vaginal delivery for my first child, no problems. And we just kind of went over my medical history, and I gave him permission to look over my medical files. So he asked me who my maternal fetal medicine doctor was, and I told him, and he actually knew him. He trained him before. So he's like, look, I will talk to him. We will go over the details, and I will call you back. And I'm like, okay, it's 10 p.m. at night. When are you going to call me back? Okay, whatever. All right. So next morning, I get up at 7 a.m., getting my daughter ready for school. This is the day of my C-section. My C-section was scheduled, I believe, at like 10 a.m., somewhere around there. And I'm like, oh, well, he hasn't called me back. Like, should I just go to the C-section then? Like, I don't understand. He calls me at like 8 o'clock in the morning. And he's like, look, I talked to him, and here's a good plan for you. So he went over the plan. He said, let's do the induction. We'll start you at a super low dose, and we'll get your blood type so that we can have some extra blood in case, you do start hemorrhaging at some point. We'll have you in the OR in case of anything crazy happening. And yeah, let's do that. And I was like, okay, instant peace about this. Okay. All right, let's do it. So canceled the C-section, and we scheduled an induction at 39 weeks. One of my other hesitancies was having my baby a little bit earlier than I normally would have hoped. So 39 weeks induction, and we started the induction. My plan was to go as long, like the entire labor with no epidural. I made it to about 8 centimeters. The Pitocin was pretty intense, and so I decided to get an epidural at that time. By the time I got the epidural, though, my daughter was already coming down the birth canal, and they set me up in the OR. They had everything ready. I delivered her. They put her on me skin to skin. They administered Pitocin and another drug to help with the contracting of my uterus, so that minimal bleeding would occur. So they gave me that medication. We waited for the placenta. Placenta came, no obvious secreto, no severe bleeding. I never needed any blood. Had the vaginal birth that I wanted. My daughter was perfectly fine. It was a good delivery. It was awesome. So that's my feedback story. So, what about this birth? What does that have to do with the foundations of having a good birth? Well, let's take a look, and let me go over my actual first C-section, and we'll start to go into that. So with my C-section, I had a little bit of bleeding with my daughter at a placenta previa. Placenta covers part of the cervix, and I had a little bit of bleeding. I guess I was having some small contractions, but they weren't that intense or anything like that. And they told me, like if, the contractions, keep going, or if there's more bleeding, then there's a possibility of a C-section. Okay, cool. So in the morning, still some contractions. She's like, can you really feel that? And I'm like, no, not really, just small contractions. My bleeding actually had lightened up from the previous day. And so they came in, they talked to me like, we'll just kind of observe you. We'll tell you a little bit about, NICU babies and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, cool. All right. So still bleeding starts to lighten up. Didn't really feel too many contractions or anything like that. But then everybody kind of rolls in, and they're just like, yeah, can you sign this consent form? And I'm like, sure, I guess. So I'm signing consent forms for like a possibility of a C-section in case that would happen. And then they're like, a couple hours later, they're just like transferring me to another room. They're like, hey, we're gonna give you this magnesium. You're gonna start to feel really warm. They gave me the magnesium. Felt unbelievably uncomfortable. It was horrible. I'm like crying because it just felt so uncomfortable. And they're like, oh yeah, this is just in case, we're gonna give you some steroids just in case, like, you have to have that C-section and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And then they are coming in, putting something over my head. Here, put this on. Yeah, we're gonna roll you in for a C-section. Here's some information about, baby, your NICU babies, where your NICU baby's gonna be. Yeah, we're gonna schedule this. We're gonna do the C-section now. And I'm like, oh, we are. We're doing it now. Oh, okay. They roll me in for the C-section. Had the C-section. Felt super nauseous, very uncomfortable during the C-section. Okay. I had my baby at 31 weeks premature. She ended up being fine. She's doing great now. But do you notice any of those differences? I didn't have a good idea of what was going on in my birth. They told me one thing and then just started doing another. I actually wasn't expecting to have a C-section at all that day. I thought they were just kind of prepping me for that possibility. Because they didn't really tell me that there was anything wrong. They didn't tell me that what was going on with my placenta, really, just maybe that there was a little bit of bleeding from the placenta. They didn't tell me anything. I had no idea what was going on at all. Super traumatic for me. So let's go into why it's important. Why does your birth matter? Why is it important that you have these foundations for a good and positive birth? So why does your birth matter? Well, one, it impacts bonding with your baby. If you have a really bad experience and you're so exhausted and you're mentally exhausted, how can you really put a lot of focus on bonding your baby? You have all these stress hormones going through the roof, and that stress hormones actually lowers the oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone in your body. Okay, this is something that you're going to remember for a long time. You're going to be telling this story to your children. Your children are going to be telling their stories to their children about how they were born. These births isn't just a one-time thing. This is not something that you have one time and then you kind of forget about it and it's whatever. No, this is also going to impact how your children are going to view birth in general. It can also impact if you want more children. If you have a horrible birth, and I know so many women who had a terrible first birth that was so extremely traumatic that they decided that they don't want any more kids. That's it. That was so horrible. I don't want to go through that again. Even though they had planned to maybe have 2 or 3 more kids, after that first initial experience with birth, absolutely don't want to do it anymore. And who can blame them? Who can blame them? Okay, so mental health is also affected by how your birth is. If again you have a birth that you felt like you had no control over, that was super traumatic and that was a very difficult birth and labor, you are actually at an increased risk for postpartum anxiety, depression, and even OCD. So it's really impactful on your mental health. Also, how your birth goes can actually either set you up for a lot of success with breastfeeding, or it can actually decrease your success with breastfeeding. And not only that, your birth affects your baby's immune system and digestive system, the way that you birth, okay? The way that you birth, if you do skin to skin with your baby, if you breastfeed your baby, it all connects together. If you had a hard birth and it affects breastfeeding, then it's going to impact your baby's immune system, okay? So birth is so important. It matters now. It's going to matter also in the future. So let's get into the 5 foundations. Actually, it's more like 6 foundations with some under bullet points. But what are the foundations to have an empowering birth? Well, one, you need to have a provider that is supportive. The provider that I had, he was with my VBAC, so supportive, always let me know what was going on and made sure that I understood what the benefits and the risks were. I also had the additional provider who was willing to work with me and listen to what I said. Both of these providers wanted what was not only best for me and my baby, but personalized it to make it a good experience for me. Okay, so make sure that when you are looking for a provider, you interview the provider and get their understanding of how they view birth. Okay, and if they're going to be supportive of the things that you would like. So some good questions to ask your provider is, what is their C-section rate? Or how supportive are you of VBACs? Okay. How do you view a natural birth? And there's going to be some interview questions in my Confident Start to Pregnancy course. It's completely free. So if you haven't taken it yet or looked at it yet, go ahead. I will put the links in the comments below, in the description below, so you guys can look at that. And there's a module about interviewing a provider. Okay. Also, choosing the right hospital for you. Okay. Or any birthplace for that matter. So choosing the right birthplace for the birth that you want. Okay. So certain policies can limit what you can do with your birth. So if you want a natural birth, the most ideal place for you to honestly deliver would either be like at home or in a birth center. But if that option is not available, giving birth at the hospital, you want to make sure that you have a provider again and understand what the hospital policies are to make sure that you can reach that goal. So if there's a lot of limits on moving or a lot of things you have to do that can limit your freedom to move, then maybe you should look at something else, or maybe you should look at figuring out ways how you can personalize it for you and make that communication, which kind of goes into who's your support person. Okay. So whoever your support person, they should know, again, what you want for your birth. Okay. Are they educated, and are they going to be willing to stand up for the birth that you want? Okay. Even if it's a little bit different and outside of the routine of what normal hospital policies are. Is your support person going to understand, if things slow down in your labor, how do we speed things up? How do we keep it moving? Okay. All right. Which again goes into my next point. Be educated, know your rights as a pregnant mom. Understand that this is your body, this is your baby. You can decline, accept, ask for more information on any procedure that you have. Having a general understanding of how your body works and how birth works, and understanding the policies that are in your hospital will give you an idea of how you can reach the goals and what things you can tweak and adjust to make it a personalized and an empowering birth for you. Okay. Having a good view of birth can make or break your experience of labor. For hundreds of years ago with birth, moms, sisters, everyone saw birth. Birth was normal. Daughters saw their moms give birth, their sisters give birth, their cousins give birth, their aunts give birth. Okay, they were exposed to birth. They saw birth all the time. It wasn't a scary thing for them. Nowadays, we're not really exposed to birth, and we're not actually exposed to physiological birth, which means a birth without interventions that occurs naturally. Okay, a lot of times now our view of birth is that most births need hospital intervention to be safe, and that a natural birth that occurs without interventions is an exception to that rule. Okay, so having a good view of birth, having exposure of a natural birth can change your view on birth. Now, also, if there are fears or trauma from past births, that can also affect how you view your birth in subsequent babies or subsequent pregnancies. Okay, so you really have to work on letting go of those fears and understanding what happened in your last birth that caused the certain events to happen, and then figuring out if there's a way to prevent those things from happening again, which honestly encourage all of you guys, please get a doula. A doula can help you with every step of the way when figuring out these things, from understanding what the normal policies are, how you can get to your goals, creating a birth plan for you, and advocating for what you want. Additionally, if you guys are interested, I do offer services doing birth guiding sessions. In my birth guiding sessions, we take a look at we talk about the different hospital policies. We talk about what your goals are for your birth. We talk about how you can cope and do comfort measures during birth in case, even if you wanted an epidural, leading up to the epidural, how can we create a personalized birth experience for you? And then how, if you, like I said, if you wanted that epidural, like how can we cope with the labor pains until we get the epidural and things like that. I also do birth plans for C-sections to make it more of a birth experience and less like a surgery. So if you guys are interested in that, I will leave the link in the description below so you guys can check it out. All right. Awesome. So knowing what the 6 healthy birth practices are is super important as well, and having a good foundation for an empowering birth. So what are the 6 healthy birth practices? The first one is going to be let labor begin on its own, okay? Making sure that we're not really rushing the process unless it's unsafe for both mom and baby to stay pregnant or for baby to stay in utero. Making sure that you're walking, moving around, changing positions during labor will help your labor progress, which failure to progress is one of the #1 reasons moms have C-sections. Again, bringing someone who's a loved one or a friend or doula for continuous support, someone that's going to support you throughout your entire labor. You want to avoid interventions that are not medically necessary as well. So again, there's a lot of things that happen in the hospital that are just routine. This is what we do normally. This is just kind of how things go. I had one mom who I worked with. She had an induction, and she was on this medication called Cytotec to help dilate her cervix. And she was starting to dilate, but after like 4 hours, they're just like, oh, let's just start Pitocin. And there wasn't any medical reason for them to start Pitocin yet at that time. So we talked about it, and they decided, actually, let's wait. Let's see how things go. It's only been 4 hours. Let's see how my labor progresses. So again, making sure that there is a routine, but is it the best thing for you and your baby? You want to avoid giving birth on your back. You want to try to follow your body's urge to push. This is really important to preventing tearing, also from preventing pelvic injury, things like that. And then being on your back can have you use more energy, and can also cause certain interventions like forceps and vacuums to be used during the vaginal delivery, which also increases your risk of pelvic floor injury and tearing. You want to keep mom and baby together as much as possible. Skin to skin is so important for your babies, guys. I can't even tell you how important it is for your baby, but it just helps with the bonding experience. It improves breastfeeding rates and honestly can save lives. So these are my foundations for birth. If you guys are loving this information, go ahead, or have questions about this information, feel free to email me, ask these questions, check out my website, check out my blog to see if any of the answers to your questions are there. And I hope you guys found this super, super informative. So if you haven't taken my Confident Start to Pregnancy course, we really go over how to set up your pregnancy to help lead up to a empowering birth for you and for your baby. And again, birth planning sessions I do with anyone who would like either more tips on how to make their birth more personalized, and if there's anything going on in your birth that you feel like you want to be changed or to have a different outcome, or even going over how your last birth went and how you want to prevent certain things from happening again. I have helped people, not even just talking to them, just them wanting a certain birth. And I had this one mom, she's like, yeah, like my provider wants to do an induction, and I know that I'm gonna have to get this and this and that, and I didn't want to do that, but I don't know what to do because I guess it's just what I have to do now. And I'm like, girl, do you know that you have options? Like, you can start with this one medication, see it how it goes. You can uh, do some intermittent monitoring with your baby. Like, it's actually your choice to do that, and things like that. You can walk around. And honestly, I like, even talking with this mom, she's like, well, what if I have to do that, blah 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 blah. And I'm just like, look, there are things that you can do to make it to still make it a good experience. And we talked about that. And actually, we also discussed her fears that she had with her previous baby, that she was really afraid of happening again. Okay. Also, her induction was not medically necessary. She was only, like, I think 3 or 4 days past her due date, which is not, as long as baby's doing well, mom's doing well, that's not a medical reason to induce. So we also talked about her fears that she had with her previous birth. And I gave her some tips on how to kind of move labor along. And she actually ended up going into labor, I kid you not, like 5 hours later, and had her baby the next day, early that morning. And she had the birth that she wanted. So I do have those birth guiding sessions if you guys are really interested in that. But otherwise, it's been such a pleasure talking to you all. Feel free to, email me with any questions you have about my services and things like that. So again, thank you guys, and I hope to hear from you soon.